What if I told you that the heaviest thing you have been carrying is not the weight of what you lost, but the grip you have been using to hold on to it? Not the absence itself, but the refusal to let the absence speak. There is something that happens in the body first, before the mind understands. A kind of exhaustion that lives deeper than tiredness. You wake one morning and your hands feel different. Not weaker, but less certain. The thing you have been clutching, whether it is a relationship that ended, a version of yourself that no longer fits, a hope that has quietly died, or a role you have been performing for so long you forgot it was a costume. That thing begins to feel strange in your palms. Not because you have decided to release it, but because something inside you has already begun the process of opening. This is not giving up. This is not defeat. This is not the moment when you admit failure or collapse into resignation. It is something else entirely, something our language barely touches. It is the moment when the soul, exhausted by the mind's insistence on control, begins to trust what remains when the clinging stops. And what remains is not emptiness. What remains is you, beneath the story you have been telling, beneath the identity you constructed around the thing you're holding, beneath the fear that without this weight, you will disappear. You have felt this, perhaps without naming it. A moment in the late afternoon when the light slants through the window in a particular way, and you're standing in the kitchen or sitting at the edge of your bed, and something inside you shifts. Not dramatically, not with revelation or clarity, just a quiet sense that you're tired of fighting, tired of insisting, tired of the endless inner argument about whether you should keep trying or whether you have already failed. And in that tiredness, if you let yourself feel it fully, there's a strange kind of relief. Not happiness, not peace exactly, but a softening. The muscles around your chest release slightly. Your jaw unclenches. You exhale, and the exhale is longer than usual, and you realize you've been holding your breath for weeks, maybe months. This is where it begins. Not with a decision, not with a plan, but with the body's quiet rebellion against the mind's tyranny. The body knows before you do. It knows when the effort has become violence against yourself. It knows when the holding on has turned into a kind of self-imprisonment. And so it begins to let go, not because you are weak, but because something in you is wiser than your fear. Nothing that is happening to you is accidental. The timing of your exhaustion, the particular quality of your sadness, the way certain memories keep surfacing even though you try to push them down, all of it is part of a process that is older than your conscious understanding. You are not falling apart. You're being reorganized from within. The structures that once held you are being dismantled, not by some external force, but by the deeper intelligence of your own psyche, which knows what you need even when your mind insists on something else. Carl Jung spent his life observing this process, not as a distant scientist, but as someone who had walked through it himself. He understood that the psyche is not a machine you can control, but a living system that moves according to its own rhythms. He watched people cling to outdated versions of themselves, to relationships that had become prisons, to beliefs that no longer nourished them. And he saw how the unconscious would eventually intervene, not with force, but with symptoms. Depression that will not lift, anxiety that makes no logical sense, dreams that repeat the same images, a restlessness that no distraction can quiet. These are not signs that something is wrong with you. They are signs that something in you is trying to become right. He spoke of synchronicity, the way outer events mirror inner states, not because the universe is magical, but because when you're truly present to your inner process, you begin to notice the patterns that were always there. You think of someone you have not spoken to in years, and they contact you the next day. You struggle with a question, and a stranger says something in passing that answers it. You feel a pull toward a particular place or activity, and when you follow it, you meet exactly what you needed to meet. This is not coincidence. This is the way life responds when you stop forcing and start listening. In this exploration, I will share with you 7 inner shifts, 7 quiet signs that indicate you are not losing yourself, but finding what was always underneath. These are not steps to follow or goals to achieve. They are recognitions, moments when you might pause and say, yes, I know this feeling. Yes, this is happening in me. And in that recognition, something changes. Not because you have done anything, but because awareness itself is transformative. Stay with me through all of them, because each one builds on the last. And by the end, you may see your recent struggles not as failures, but as the necessary labor of becoming. The first sign is a strange one, and it often goes unnoticed because we have been taught to interpret it as weakness. You find yourself less interested in defending your position, not because you have been proven wrong, not because you no longer believe what you believed, but because the energy required to maintain the argument has simply drained away. You are in a conversation, maybe with a family member or a friend, and they say something that once would have triggered an immediate response in you. You would have corrected them, explained your perspective, insisted on being understood. But now, you feel the impulse rise and then fall. You open your mouth and close it again. You let them have their opinion. You let the moment pass. At first, this feels like defeat. You might even judge yourself for it, thinking you have become passive or that you are avoiding conflict out of fear. But if you sit with it longer, you begin to notice something else. The silence you chose was not empty. It was full of a kind of knowing that does not need to be spoken, full of a recognition that some battles are not worth fighting. Not because the truth does not matter, but because your energy matters more. You are beginning to trust that you do not need to convince anyone of your worth, your perspective, your experience. It stands on its own, whether or not it is acknowledged. This is one of the first signs that you are letting go, not of your truth, but of the desperate need to have it validated by others. You are beginning to trust what remains when the performance stops. And what remains is a quieter, steadier sense of yourself. You notice this in small ways. Someone criticizes you, and instead of spiraling into self-doubt or mounting a defense, you simply observe the criticism. You turn it over in your mind like a stone, looking at it from different angles, and then you set it down. You do not absorb it as a verdict on your being, and you do not reject it with hostility. You let it exist as one perspective among many. This capacity to hold space for differing views without collapsing into them or fighting against them is a sign of inner maturity. Jung would say you are differentiating from the collective, from the voices that have told you who you should be, what you should want, how you should respond. You are finding your own center, and from that center, the opinions of others become less threatening. They're just weather passing through. You can acknowledge them without being swept away. But this process is not comfortable. There is a period, sometimes a long one, where you feel unmoored. If you are not defending yourself, if you are not proving yourself, if you are not performing the identity you have always performed, then who are you? The space between the old self and the new one is disorienting. You might feel invisible. You might feel like you're disappearing. People who are used to a certain version of you may become confused or even upset. They may accuse you of changing, of becoming distant, of not caring anymore. And in a way, they are right. You are changing. You are becoming distant from the roles that no longer fit. You are caring less about maintaining an image and more about honoring what is true inside you. This is where many people turn back. The discomfort of not knowing who you are becoming is so intense that they rush back into the old patterns, the old arguments, the old ways of being seen. They pick up the weight they had just set down because at least it is familiar. At least it gives them something to do, some way to define themselves. But if you can stay in the discomfort, if you can let yourself not know for a while, something extraordinary begins to happen. You start to hear your own voice beneath the noise. Not the voice that reacts, but the voice that observes. Not the voice that defends, but the voice that simply knows. The second sign follows naturally from the first. You begin to notice a shift in what captures your attention. Things that once consumed you, that you could spend hours thinking about, analyzing, discussing, now feel distant, almost irrelevant. It is not that you have made a conscious decision to stop caring. It is more like your psyche has quietly reallocated its resources. You find yourself scrolling past arguments on social media that once would have pulled you in. You hear gossip and feel no urge to participate. You are invited into drama, and you politely decline, not out of superiority, but out of a genuine lack of interest. This can be confusing, especially if these things once felt important to you. You might wonder if you're becoming apathetic, if you're shutting down emotionally, if something is wrong. But what is actually happening is a kind of inner pruning. Your psyche is withdrawing energy from what no longer serves your growth and redirecting it toward what does. You are not becoming less. You are becoming more concentrated, more essential. Jung spoke of libido, not in the narrow sexual sense, but as psychic energy, the life force that animates us. He observed that this energy is limited and that the psyche is constantly making decisions about where to invest it. When you are young or when you are unconscious, this energy scatters in all directions. You try to be everything to everyone. You chase every possibility. You react to every provocation. But as you mature, as you begin the process of individuation, the energy starts to consolidate. It pulls back from the periphery and moves toward the center, toward what Jung called the self, the deeper organizing principle of your being. This is what you are experiencing when you lose interest in things that once mattered. It is not loss, it is focus. Your psyche is saying, we do not have time for this anymore. We have more important work to do, and that work is internal. It is the work of integration, of bringing the scattered pieces of yourself into coherence, of discovering who you are beneath all the adaptations and performances. You might notice this in your relationships as well. Friendships that once felt vital now feel draining. Not because the other person has done anything wrong, but because the connection was based on a version of you that no longer exists. You are bonded by shared complaints, shared distractions, shared ways of avoiding deeper questions. And now that you're turning toward those questions, the bond feels thin. You still care about the person, but you no longer have the energy to maintain a connection that requires you to stay small. This is one of the most painful aspects of letting go. It is not just releasing things or ideas. It is releasing people, or at least releasing the way you have been with them. And this brings guilt. You feel like you are abandoning them, like you are being selfish, like you should try harder. But trying harder in this context means betraying yourself. It means pretending to be someone you're no longer. And the cost of that pretense is too high. It depletes you. It makes you resentful. It keeps you from the very work your soul is calling you toward. So you begin to create distance, sometimes physically, sometimes just energetically. You stop initiating contact as often. You respond with less detail. You decline invitations without elaborate explanations. And in that space, you discover something surprising. You discover that you do not fall apart without them. You discover that the fear of being alone was worse than the reality of solitude. You discover that in the quiet, you can finally hear yourself. The third sign is a shift in how you relate to time, particularly to the past. There is a moment, and it comes quietly, when you realize you're no longer trying to fix what happened. You are no longer replaying conversations in your mind, imagining what you should have said, what you could have done differently. You are no longer constructing elaborate fantasies of reconciliation or revenge. The past is still there. You remember it, but it no longer has the same grip on you. It has become just that, the past, a place you visited, not a place you live. This does not mean you have forgotten or that you have decided the past does not matter. It means you have stopped trying to change it. You have stopped arguing with reality. You have accepted that what happened, happened, and no amount of mental effort will alter it. And in that acceptance, there's a tremendous release of energy. All the energy you were using to resist what is, to wish things were different, to hold on to grievances and regrets, suddenly becomes available for something else, for presence, for the life you're actually living now. Jung understood that much of our suffering comes from our refusal to accept what is. He saw people tormented by their pasts, not because the past was so terrible, though sometimes it was, but because they could not let it be past. They kept it alive through rumination, through blame, through the fantasy that if they just thought about it enough, they could somehow undo it. But the psyche does not work that way. Healing does not come from changing the past. It comes from changing your relationship to the past. You begin to notice this shift in small ways. A memory surfaces, something that used to trigger shame or anger, and you observe it with a kind of detachment. You see it clearly, you acknowledge what happened, but you do not get pulled into the emotional vortex. You can hold the memory and yourself at the same time. You can say, yes, that was hard, and I survived it. Yes, that person hurt me, and I'm still here. Yes, I made mistakes, and I've learned from them. This is not the same as spiritual bypassing, where you pretend everything is fine and suppress your real feelings. This is what comes after you have felt everything, after you have raged and grieved and sat with the full weight of what happened. This is the natural resolution that occurs when you stop resisting your own experience. The pain does not disappear, but it transforms. It becomes part of your story, part of the texture of who you are, but it is no longer the whole story. It is no longer the lens through which you see everything. And as you release the past, you also begin to release the future you had planned. This is perhaps even harder. We invest so much in our expectations, in a vision of how things were supposed to unfold. We make plans, we set goals, we imagine the life we will have, the person we will become, the relationships we will build. And when those visions do not materialize, when life takes a different turn, we feel betrayed. We feel like we have failed, or like life has failed us. We hold on to the plan, even when it is clear the plan is no longer viable, because letting it go feels like admitting defeat. But what if the plan was never the point? What if the plan was just a scaffolding, something to help you move forward, but not the destination itself? What if the real life, the real growth, is happening in the deviation from the plan, in the unexpected turns, in the moments when everything falls apart and you have to find a new way? This is what you are beginning to understand. You are beginning to see that letting go of the future you imagined does not mean you have no future. It means you are making space for a future you could not have imagined, one that is more aligned with who you actually are, not who you thought you should be. And this requires trust. It requires a willingness to move forward without knowing exactly where you're going, to take the next step even when the path is not clear. The fourth sign is a change in your relationship with control. You have always been someone who tries to manage things, to anticipate problems, to have a plan. This is not a flaw. It is a survival strategy, one you probably developed early in response to chaos or unpredictability, or the sense that if you did not take care of things, no one would. But now, you're beginning to notice how exhausting it is, how much energy it takes to constantly monitor and adjust and worry, how little of life you actually experience because you are so busy trying to control it. You start to see the futility of it, not in a despairing way, but in a liberating one. You realize that most of what you worry about never happens, and the things that do happen are rarely the things you prepared for. You realize that your attempts to control outcomes often backfire, creating more tension and resistance than if you had simply allowed things to unfold. You realize that the tighter you grip, the more slips through your fingers. And so, slowly, you begin to experiment with loosening your grip. You make a decision and then let it go, trusting that you will handle whatever comes. You enter a situation without a script, without a plan, and you discover that you can improvise, that you can respond in the moment. that you do not need to have everything figured out in advance. You stop micromanaging your relationships, trying to control how others see you, what they think, how they respond. You show up as you are and let them respond as they will. This is terrifying at first. The mind resists it with every tool it has. It tells you that if you do not control things, everything will fall apart. It tells you that relaxation is dangerous, that trust is naive, that you need to stay vigilant or disaster will strike. But as you continue to loosen your grip, as you continue to let go in small ways, you begin to gather evidence to the contrary. Things do not fall apart. In fact, they often work out better than they would have if you try to force them. Opportunities appear that you could not have planned for. People show up in ways that surprise you. Solutions emerge from unexpected places. You are learning to trust the process, to trust that there is an intelligence at work that is larger than your conscious mind, larger than your will. Jung called this the self, the organizing center of the psyche that guides individuation. Others might call intuition, or the universe, or God. The name does not matter. What matters is the felt sense that you are not alone in this, that you're being guided, that you can relax into the unfolding of your life rather than constantly battling against it. This does not mean you become passive. It does not mean you stop making choices or taking action. It means your actions come from a different place. They come from presence and responsiveness rather than fear and control. You act because it feels right, because it is aligned with your inner knowing, not because you're trying to prevent some imagined catastrophe. And there's a lightness to this, a sense of play, of curiosity. Life becomes less of a problem to solve and more of an experience to engage with. The fifth sign is a deepening of your inner life. As you withdraw energy from the external world, from the constant doing and performing and managing, you find that you have more space inside. You start to notice things you've been too busy to notice. The quality of silence in the early morning, the way your breath moves in your body, the subtle shifts in your mood throughout the day. You become interested in your dreams again, in the images and symbols that arise from the unconscious. You start to write, or draw, or simply sit with yourself in a way you have not done in years. This is not escapism. This is not withdrawing from life. This is turning toward the source of life within you. This is recognizing that the outer world is a reflection of the inner world, and that if you want to change your experience of reality, you have to start from the inside. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can transform how you meet it. And that transformation happens in the inner space, in the quiet moments when you are alone with yourself, when you are willing to face what is there without distraction or avoidance. Jung believed that the unconscious is not just a repository of repressed material, but a creative source, a wellspring of wisdom and insight that is always available if you know how to listen. He encouraged people to engage with their inner world through active imagination, through paying attention to dreams, through creative expression, not as a therapeutic exercise, but as a way of life, a way of staying connected to the deeper currents of the psyche. You might find yourself drawn to practices you once dismissed as impractical or self-indulgent. Meditation, journaling, long walks alone, sitting in nature without your phone. At first, these practices feel awkward, almost pointless. Your mind resists the stillness, fills the space with chatter, with to-do lists, with worries. But if you persist, if you keep showing up to the silence, something begins to shift. The chatter quiets, the space deepens, and in that depth, you start to hear a voice that is not the voice of your conditioning, not the voice of your fear, but the voice of your soul. This voice does not shout. It does not demand. It speaks in whispers, in hunches, in the feeling that arises when you are considering a choice. It speaks through your body, through the tightness in your chest that says no, through the opening in your heart that says yes. It speaks through synchronicity, through the book that falls off the shelf, through the conversation you overhear, through the dream that stays with you all day. And as you learn to listen to this voice, as you learn to trust it, your life begins to align in ways that feel almost miraculous. Not because anything supernatural is happening, but because you are finally moving in harmony with your own nature. The sixth sign is a paradoxical one. As you let go, as you stop trying so hard, you find that you are more effective, not less. Things that felt impossible when you were forcing them now happen with ease. Opportunities arise. Doors open. People respond to you differently. This is not because you have become more skilled or more strategic. It is because you have become more authentic. You are no longer broadcasting the frequency of desperation, of neediness, of trying to prove yourself. You are simply being, and that being has a magnetic quality. It draws toward you what is meant for you and repels what is not. You notice this in your work. Projects that you were struggling with suddenly flow. Ideas come easily. Collaborations form naturally. You are not working harder, but your work is more aligned, more resonant, more true. You notice this in your relationships. The right people start showing up. People who see you, who appreciate you, who do not need you to be anything other than what you are. And the wrong people, the ones who are draining you, quietly fade away, not through conflict, but through natural attrition. This is the principle of Wu Wei, of effortless action, that the Taoists spoke of. It is the idea that when you are aligned with the Tao, with the natural flow of things, your actions are effective without being forced. You are like water, moving around obstacles rather than trying to break through them, finding the path of least resistance, and yet over time, shaping the landscape. Jung would say you are moving from ego to self, from the small, defended, controlling self to the larger, more spacious, more connected self. And from that place, life is not a battle. It is a dance. You are not fighting against reality. You are moving with it, responding to it, co-creating with it. And this requires a fundamental shift in how you see yourself. You are not the lone hero struggling against a hostile world. You are a participant in a larger unfolding, a thread in a vast tapestry. And your role is not to control the pattern, but to be fully, authentically yourself, trusting that your thread is exactly where it needs to be. The seventh sign, and perhaps the most subtle, is a growing sense of gratitude, not for what you have gained, but for what you have lost. This sounds strange, maybe even offensive, especially if your losses have been painful. But there comes a moment, often long after the loss, when you look back and see that what you thought was being taken from you was actually making space for something else. The relationship that ended freed you to discover who you are outside of that dynamic. The job you lost pushed you toward work that is more meaningful. The dream that died made room for a dream you did not even know you had. This is not about pretending that loss does not hurt or that everything happens for a reason in some simplistic way. This is about recognizing that life is not linear, that what looks like an ending is often a beginning in disguise, that the soul has its own curriculum, and sometimes the lessons require subtraction before addition. You are not grateful that you suffered. You are grateful that you survived, that you grew, that you are becoming someone you could not have become without the loss. And in this gratitude, there is a profound letting go. You stop resenting what happened. You stop wishing things had been different. You accept your life as it is, with all its scars and detours and unexpected turns. And you see that it is yours, uniquely yours, and that it has shaped you into someone with depth, with compassion, with wisdom that only comes from having walked through the fire and emerged on the other side. This is the final release, not the release of the thing itself, but the release of the story you have been telling about the thing, the story that you are a victim, the story that you were wronged, the story that your life should have been different. You let go of the story, and what remains is the raw, uninterpreted experience. And in that rawness, there is a kind of beauty. There is the simple fact that you are here, that you are alive, that you have the capacity to feel and to choose and to grow. All of these signs, these 7 quiet shifts, are not separate. They are facets of a single process, the process of coming home to yourself, of releasing the false structures, the borrowed identities, the desperate grasping, and trusting what remains when all of that falls away. And what remains is not nothing. What remains is the essence of who you are, the part of you that was there before the wounding, before the conditioning, before the fear. It is the part of you that knows how to be, how to breathe, how to respond to life with openness rather than defense. This process is not quick. It does not follow a timeline. You cannot force it or schedule it or check it off a list. It unfolds in its own time, in its own way. And your only job is to cooperate with it, to notice it, to honor it. There will be days when you feel like you're moving backward, when the old patterns resurface, when you find yourself gripping again, defending again, trying to control again. This is normal. This is part of the process. You are not failing. You are spiraling, returning to the same issues at a deeper level, integrating what you could not integrate before. Be gentle with yourself in this. The culture tells you to be strong, to push through, to never give up. And there's a place for that kind of determination. But there is also a place for softness, for surrender, for admitting that you do not have all the answers, that you cannot do it alone, that you need help, that you need rest, that you need to let go. Letting go is not weakness. It is the ultimate strength. It is the willingness to trust that you are held by something larger than yourself, that you do not have to carry everything, that you can set down the weight and still be okay. If you want to support this process, there are simple practices you can engage with, not to fix yourself, because you are not broken, but to create space for the unfolding. You might begin a practice of noticing, just noticing. When you feel the urge to control, notice it. When you feel the grip of fear, notice it. When you feel the pull of the past or the anxiety about the future, notice it. Do not try to change it. Just see it. Awareness itself is transformative. When you see a pattern clearly, it begins to lose its power over you. You might also write, not to produce anything, not to be eloquent or insightful, but simply to give your inner world a place to speak. Write about what you are feeling, what you are noticing, what you are letting go of. Write about your dreams. Write about your fears. Write about the moments when you felt something shift inside you. The act of writing externalizes the internal, makes the invisible visible, and in that visibility, there is often clarity. And you might simply sit in silence, without a goal, without a technique, without trying to achieve a particular state. Just sit with yourself, with whatever arises, with the discomfort, with the boredom, with the sadness, with the peace. Sit and breathe and let yourself be, without needing to be anything other than what you are in this moment. This is the practice of presence, and presence is the ground from which all transformation grows. Remember, nothing that is happening to you is random. The timing of your exhaustion, the particular shape of your struggle, the people who have left, the doors that have closed, the dreams that have died, all of it is part of a larger pattern, a larger intelligence that is guiding you toward wholeness. You're not being punished. You're not being tested. You are being prepared. The old structures are falling away because they can no longer contain who you are becoming. And yes, it is painful. Yes, it is disorienting. Yes, there are moments when you feel like you're losing everything. But you are not losing everything. You are losing what was never truly yours, what you were holding onto out of fear, out of habit, out of the belief that without it, you would not exist. And now you are discovering that you do exist, that you are more real without the false supports, that you are more alive in the uncertainty than you ever were in the illusion of control. This is the gift of letting go. Not that you get something better, though sometimes you do, but that you become someone truer, someone who can hold paradox, who can sit with not knowing, who can love without clinging, who can grieve without collapsing, who can hope without demanding. You are being initiated into a deeper way of being, one that our culture does not teach, one that you can only learn by walking through the fire of your own transformation. And you're not walking alone. Others have walked this path before you. Jung walked it. The mystics walked it. Every person who has ever truly grown has walked it. And they left markers, not instructions, but reflections, so that when you find yourself in the dark, you might remember that the dark is not the end, but the place where the new beginning is gestating. So if you're in the process of letting go, if you recognize yourself in these signs, know that you are exactly where you need to be. Trust the process. Trust the timing. Trust what remains when the grasping stops. You are not falling apart. You are falling together in a new configuration, one that is more spacious, more authentic, more aligned with the truth of who you are. And that truth is not something you need to create or achieve. It is something you need to uncover, to remember, to come home to. If this reflection has resonated with you, if you have felt the recognition, the sense that yes, this is what I am experiencing, I invite you to like this video, to subscribe to the channel, to share it with someone who might need to hear it. And I invite you to leave a comment, to share your own experience of letting go, to add your voice to this conversation. Because we are all walking this path together, and your story matters. Your process matters. You matter. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for trusting what remains.